It has been 2 days now, and still the one word just echoes through when I think about Carlos Alcaraz's 2025 U.S. Open win, and that is dominant. Absolutely dominant by any metric, any facet of his game, stacking this run up against the dominant runs of the past. Utterly dominant through and through. At this point, you've probably heard the stat over and over again, but let's just go through it again. Just the one set lost all tournament to Sinner in the final. Broken just 3 times throughout the entirety of this title run. Second only to a pretty damn great server all time in Pete Sampras, who was only broken 2 times en route to the 97 Wimbledon title. And then a record for himself, the fewest amount of break points faced en route to a major title run. At least all of these as far as since they've started keeping track of these stats. And that goes down with Alcaraz breaking the previously held 12 by Federer at Wimbledon 2006. Alcaraz goes through the entirety of this tournament, facing only the 10 break points total. And yeah, just visually watching it all tournament long, it really just was a statement performance. And after last season, I was in a place where I was like, honestly, for Alcaraz to do the things that live up to the expectations that people have for him, I don't even think that roller coaster nature of his game needed to be cut out completely. I felt like, him as is, he can do it. It's always been very overwhelming when the highs come, no matter who you are. And yeah, as one of the great pressure performers that I've seen in the sport, him being able to always manage to just catch those hot streaks when necessary and be overwhelming when he needed to, I felt like that was still plenty enough given the completeness of his skill set already at such a young age. That in tandem with having this super overwhelming peak for anybody on the other side of the net, plus possessing, being made of the right stuff upstairs mentally, having these crazy clutch intangibles. I thought all that was more than enough to tick off everything that needed to be done and, build his case into becoming this all-time great tennis player. You may see, a couple of bad months out of him, but most of the time, honestly, that had been, post-major tennis season after the U.S. Open for Alcaraz anyways. But you fast forward to 2025, the year starts a little bit rocky, even through historically a great part of the season for him in the Sunshine Double. That being the portion of the season that got his years going from 2022 to 2024. And from the jump, he's not satisfied to just coast on his gifts out of the box. I mean, he's trying new techniques on the backhand, the serve, added some weight on the racket in the offseason as well. And you can go back, going into the spring, even during clay court season, I was questioning whether all of this was really a great decision. The serve hadn't seemed to be paying dividends to that point. In rallies, it felt like because of that extra weight on the racket, he was a little extra errant and just didn't have the typical stability the longer, you could get him into rallies, it felt like. And some of that, even once he started winning during clay court season, I would say that stability felt like it returned during Rome from the back of the court. But, you have seen in real time how valuable it has been, all of these things that he did at the beginning of the year that didn't pay off immediately. Staying the course really seems to have, seen him hit pay dirt here this season. And at different points, you're seeing these improvements make an impression in his game. At Roland Garros, I remember Andre Agassi at the desk talking about his new backhand motion, adding an element of extra power, extra control, and extra deception. throughout the course of grass court season, from the jump in Queens a couple weeks after the Marathon Roland Garros final. You're seeing the serve take a new shape, winning him all these free points, and throughout the course of week 2 at Wimbledon as well, that translating over, something that he really needed in a tournament where his ground game was a little bit scratchy throughout the course of the event. It felt like the serve there really carried the day. And you saw him in real time become a better tennis player over the course of this season. But, I left a comment actually in a poll that It's Zane on Twitter made earlier during the hardcourt season of if Alcaraz is a better player now than 2023. And I referenced these improvements. I think they did make him into the best version of himself that we have seen to this point early on in his career. It's just that I don't think that throughout the course of this year he really played up to his ceiling as often as the 2023 version, because, when we look at Alcaraz, and we've talked about how much, the play will fluctuate throughout the course of matches, and that's resulted in him spending more time than he needs to on court throughout a lot of these, major wins even. The only exception to that was really 2023 up through the US Open. You look at the 3 majors that year, and, he dropped a set twice in the lead up to the Wimbledon final, once in the lead up to the US Open semi. But those events, he was mostly very, very clean. Took care of business relatively easily in the early rounds, just coughed up a set here and there. That was mostly understandable. But then you saw it. This tournament at the US Open, you saw every single improvement and bit of maturity that he has built up over the course of his young career. You saw all of it come together, work together, firing on all cylinders, all at once. I think, you could go through the entirety of his career in Roland Garros. The final this year might be the best win of his career regardless. That's, again, how great and how highly esteemed a win that was. But, as far as the best tournament of his career, the best performance of his career, it has to be this tournament and this final. And that's where things get scary. I mean, what do you even do with this guy operating at this level? I mean, everything was perfect. Every component of his game, he was so sure in how he was deploying every component of his game. He was so composed. I can probably count 2 times that weren't really even missteps, but are really the closest that you can come up with when nitpicking, again, a perfect run. I think legitimately the dude that was able to consistently stay connected the longest was Opelka in round 1. And again, that's round 1. That's typically where your top guys, are going to be sort of on cruise control or getting into the flow of things. And in that particular match, it just happened to be because of the huge serving. Alcaraz couldn't create as much separation, I felt like, as he did at one point or the other, if not straight from the get-go in most of his matches this tournament. Opelka had a couple of breakpoint openings that maybe could have won him a set in the second, even early third set. But other than that, I mean, he was very nervy through the first 2 sets, I thought, of the Djokovic match. But again, it was, the serve at his back that always seemed to have Djokovic at arm's length, even with Alcaraz not really having his best stuff in the first 2 sets. He was pretty much untouchable behind his first serve in particular. Neither guy really ever playing particularly well in those first 2 sets. Definitely felt the element there where I said in my preview of that match that I felt like the Djokovic one was definitely still the most mentally challenging for Alcaraz, the biggest test of his focus. And I will say, for 2 sets, it did feel a little bit like he was seeing ghosts and, feeling like he had to do more than he actually did against this version of Djokovic. But credit to him, unlike, at the beginning of the year where against, albeit a much better Novak in Australia this year. He let the situation of letting him hang around while injured, sort of snowball him over the course of that match once adrenaline took over for Novak. But since then, he's been in that spot a couple of times this year. Musetti in the Monte Carlo final, the second set against Zverev in Cincinnati this year, and yeah, Djokovic wasn't injured in that US Open match, or at least not, severely hampered. Did seem like he was carrying niggles and, his upper body throughout the course of the tournament, but nonetheless, it was more so just the fact that, Djokovic just never could push into the upper limits of his abilities throughout the course of this tournament, and Alcaraz did let him see a bit of a lifeline for most of two sets, but unlike the beginning of the year, he never, in any of those cases, let it, snowball out of control. And then you look at how he played this final, it was a thing of beauty. And, it was one thing dominating the rest of the field throughout the course of this tournament. It's another altogether doing so against Jannik Sinner on a hard court, best of 5. You could even add in a little sprinkle of the roof being closed as well. And even that match was dominant. I know I didn't get around to making the prediction video for the final, but I'll throw up the screenshot here with my 2 podcast hosts. I did have Alcaraz in 4, and you could come up with all this elaborate reasoning for it, but honestly, it was as simple as just feeling like a little bit actually that the shoe was on the other foot from Wimbledon, and I think in this case the gap being even bigger because Alcaraz was just that amazing throughout the course of this tournament, where I just felt good enough in his form and that he had been the best player this event, the most impressive player this event. And Sinner, more than anything, is serving just needing to pick up from what it had been all tournament. I felt the score lines for him throughout the course of his lead up to the final could have been a little bit deceiving to the fact that was sticking out if you were watching his matches. Didn't get broken much, but really from round 2, Popyrin, then Shapovalov, then even Musetti got 0 for 7. Felix went 1 for 10, I believe. A lot of guys were creating quite a few looks on the center serve here. But even so, when the match happened, it unfolded in a way that was not how I envisioned it being Alcaraz in 4, because it was even more lopsided than the scoreline would indicate. Alcaraz just did everything better throughout the course of this match. Everything was perfect. Intent, shot selection, deploying his variety really from game 1 itself, outmaneuvering Sinner, particularly putting to work the slice backhand, especially that into Sinner's backhand, I think really set him up to get the type of forehands he was looking for. And of course, throughout the entirety of this tournament, this might have been the best version of the Alcaraz forehand. It felt as nuclear as ever, with a great deal of safety all the while. And yeah, you can look at the stats. He had him beat in pretty much everything. Of course, poor serving continued for Jannik. And on the other hand, outside of the one loose Alcaraz service game at the beginning of the second set, he never really surrendered up another look. Sinner had some half chances, I think, right after he got broken in the third set for the first time. And then, of course, after saving the 2 match points in the last game of the match as well. But that was pretty much all she wrote. Alcaraz, on the day, very clearly the better player, and he did it from pretty much every part of the court. In neutral, the variety was, again, deployed to perfection, neutralized Sinner to a degree, and his defense also did so. A couple of just sensational scramble drills in this final as well from Alcaraz. Those even coming sometimes in losing efforts, because Sinner did have a pretty solid day, I would say, up at net again, like the Wimbledon final. Alcaraz in defense a lot of times made him hit a lot of tough volleys, and he made a decent amount of them. Of course, a pretty successful drop shot outing as well. I thought, watching Sinner throughout the course of this tournament, that it was sort of uncharacteristic. A lot of the droppers that he was running down, the drop shot retrieval, what he did once he got there wasn't quite up to what I'm used to. He missed a decent amount of balls in this final, and there was one I remember that he played great defense against Felix as well and missed the easiest shot of the rally once he tracked down the short ball dropper. That happened a couple times throughout the course of this final as well. And yeah, also the threat of the Alcaraz speed and how well he was defending, as I said, I think did lead to a couple of uncharacteristic, finishing balls that he missed, especially off the forehand. One to get broken in the fourth set. I think also the initial break in the third set, too, was off of a bad miss from Sinner, too. And yeah, with the serving day that he had, I think all of those were the factors on the Sinner end that made for a match that Alcaraz was able to create such a clear upper hand in. But truth be told, like I said, this was a perfect performance from Carlitos. I think, with him displaying this tour de force of, you would have to say, probably the next evolution of him in his career here throughout the course of this tournament, and that evolution operating at the very peak of its abilities. I don't know that anything was really going to deny him this fortnight. Alcaraz was absolute magic. I don't know if you would expect him to bottle up this form and be this guy every tournament, every major. If he is, then you kind of just throw out everything. There's not really a game plan for that. And yeah, only fitting, those last 2 points after Sinner saved the match points, that it was the serve that came to the rescue. In particular, the 2 ones out wide that have, quickly become the ones that, he can hit his spots on command more regularly on. And it sees him through to return to the world number 1 for the first time in about 2 years. And both times, his US Open titles, 2022 and 2025, winning the final ends up seeing him claim a stint at the world number 1 position. Of course, the road to both these US Open titles couldn't be any more diametrically opposed to one another. 2022, he does it winning the slam that sees the champion spend the most time on court of any slam champion ever. This year, as clean as a whistle, as dominant a tournament run as you will see at the majors. Very, very well deserved, and I would have to say, a fitting culmination to what he started back in the clay court season. I think this really ties a bow on the first Alcaraz submission to the all-time ranks for an extended, dominant winning run like this. No doubt it will be the first of many. The kid has well and truly, I think, now entered his prime. And what a statement way to do it. Another, I think, great thing to come out of this rivalry with Alcaraz and Sinner. Both guys intent on improving with the other guy in mind. And for good reason, because as this 2025 season has progressed, they have widened the gap more and more between them and the rest of the field. Really, at this point, playing well or not, the only real threat to the new two is the other guy. And you heard Alcaraz talk about it after this finals conclusion, talking about how he and his team really just sat down with solely Jannik in mind, going back to the drawing board after, verbally feeling outgunned in that Wimbledon final. And if there's one thing that we have known about Carlos Alcaraz from the very early days of him, on our radars, it is that he might be the quickest learner that we've ever seen in this sport. And now, for a serial improver in Jannik Sinner, it is his move. Both guys should honestly be thrilled with their seasons. Alcaraz in pole position now to finish the year world number 1, even though with the majors in the rear view, for what it's worth. Sinner, we are heading into the stretch of season post-US Open where he has dominated the last 2 years. So definitely some chance to, just add some pizzazz to his year in the ATP tournaments, put some finishing touches on his year. With that US Open win, Carlos Alcaraz is the man of the hour. I think taking ownership of this 2025 season as his own. And looking ahead, as always, I mean, the sky is the limit for him. But that'll do it for this video. If you made it this far, thank you so much for watching. I hope that you enjoyed. If you did, it would be much appreciated if you could drop a like, help this video perform a lot better in YouTube's algorithm, and also subscribe to the channel if you're not already. Thank you all again so much for watching. That will bring the curtain down on this 2025 major season. Still more action to come in the fall. So of course, I will see y'all in the next one.